Thanks for staying with We FM 106.3. The time's now 7 minutes past 3 o'clock. If you are just joining us, you're welcome. You're listening to Frankly Speaking. It's time for our weekly segment on the program here. It's time for Legislative Hour. Now, for the first-time listeners, what is Legislative Hour? I'll tell you. It's an informative platform that seeks to educate you on the legislative arm of government. The program also affords legislators an opportunity to showcase their efforts as they meet their constituents through polled questions, which we will prepare and start to put out to you. And we'll present your questions to the legislators. We can sit down on this platform, talk about issues, look on it like your Friday public hearing as far as legislation goes. Now, Legislative Platform is a segment that I do in collaboration with Mr. Oke Epia of Order Paper. Order Paper strictly covers the National Assembly, and that's why we sit down and have these conversations every single Friday. Now, today, our discussion is going to center around the relationship between the legislative and executive arms of government. We're going to be relying on a recent post by Order Paper. That's what spurred this discussion. The post sees the President of the Senate. He's not happy about how bills that are being forwarded to the presidency, how those bills are received and being processed. He's citing interference of sorts and so on and so forth. So we'll be having that discussion. How should that relationship be managed? That's the relationship between the legislative arm of government and the executive. How should it be managed? How is it managed by other parts, in other countries who practice a similar system of government as we do? How is that relationship managed? These are the questions that we're going to try to search answers for. And in a continuation of your education on how the legislative arm of government works, we'll be talking about some of the processes. We do this on a weekly basis. We'll talk about processes. Order Paper does it every week. It's called the Monday Meme. So I'll bring you today's meme, again, just to school you, because we believe that an informed people make better choices. That's how it works. Right, my pleasure to welcome to the studio this Friday again, the publisher of Order Paper, Mr. Oke Epia. Welcome and happy Friday. Happy Easter, I think, is in order. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy Good Friday.
Happy Good Friday.
And good to be here.
It is. Nice to have you again, as usual.
Great.
And let's just jump right into it. Now, the President of the Senate is not happy with the way, some of the bills were being managed at the presidency. He's citing uninformed, I'm just paraphrasing now, uninformed interference, misadvising or misleading the president. So I'm aware that there is a connection there's a go between the National Assembly and the executive arm of government, the presidency. That position is filled by a liaison or an advisor to the president on National Assembly matters. It's recently been changed. There's a new person there. It used to be Senator Ita Enang, I believe, but now it's Senator Babajide Omoworare, I believe. So what does his job entail? Let's start from there. What is his job? Because that's the first link we see between executive and legislative arm of government. That person who goes between, a former legislator himself.
Right. Thank you. And it's a very important topic because the discourse around executive, legislative, or legislature relationship is at the heart of the service delivery process, fundamentally speaking, because if that relationship is rocky, is characterized by frictions and difficulties, it invariably affects the delivery of governance process as far as policy making is concerned. And, so it's important that that relationship is carefully managed, is carefully processed to avoid, a situation where we have governments and they are not governing, as it were, because this is democracy. Another fundamental point to note is that, this is a presidential system of government, and which allows for what you call separation of powers on one hand. On the other hand, you have checks and balances. These are key to principles of presidential democracy as we know it, indeed, everywhere else in the world. So where you have these principles in operation, you are bound to have potentials, of some rockiness, some frictions, some difficulties. Let me put it that way. In the relationship between the executive and the legislature, and that's why it's important that it is carefully managed. It is deliberately managed to ensure that service is delivered by the federal government, and that is why, like you have noted, place has been made for specific officials, to try and, be liaisons between both arms of government. It's been the practice from way back, even before the Fourth Republic, where you have the president deploy an official, a liaison officer, a presidential liaison officer, it used to be called. Now we call it a senior special advisor or special assistant. And there are two of them, basically, because we have a bicameral system, a legislature. So two of them are deployed, one in the Senate, one in the House of Reps, because it's quite an enormous work to do. So,
I never knew that. I just took it to be one, the one to the Senate, because we always hear Senator XYZ, but thank you so much.
Yeah, there are two of them. Currently, we have one gentleman that manages the relationship, as it were, for the House of Representatives. In the House of Representatives for the presidency, I'm not immediate to get his name, but so you have two of them, that are on that line of duty.
Okay.
So when the president of the Senate makes a comment like officials are misadvising the president with regards to bills, is probably, without mentioning names, zeroing on the performance of those officials. The report that you mentioned, of course, suggests that, okay, officials in the ministries, MDAs, in the ministries, departments, and agencies, maybe what he's talking about. But, when you have schedule officers whose bit is to ensure a smooth relationship between the arms of government, it beggars the point to begin to talk of officials in MDAs. So that's why I said to me, it's like calling out those officials to say, hey, look, what's going on? Because those have primary responsibility to advise the president, apart from, of course, the office of the Attorney General, Minister of Justice, that must, of course, make, an advisory on every bill and every, before the president either accepts or declines to give an assent to a bill, So those two officials are on the spot on this matter.
Okay.
That clarity must be established, So what is it that is their failings? Interestingly, the SSA in the Senate, Babajide Omowari, is an experienced legislator. In fact, he was in the Senate until 2015. In the 8th Senate. Yeah, he was in the 8th Senate. He had even served at the level of the State House of Assembly in Lagos. So he's someone who is quite tested, who has that kind of legislative experience and background to be able to properly navigate the relationship between both arms of government. On behalf of his principal, Mr. President, and of course the complexity and political dynamics of the Senate, But you see, that's actually the challenge, So maybe we need to get more information. Maybe we need to have the president of the Senate speak, give us more detail about
specifics.
What he means by who is actually misadvising the president. And again, this point must be made. It looks like also begging the issue when you come out publicly to say some people are misadvising the president. The president of the Senate has direct access to the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. He is also in a position to drop his advice and offer in certain clarity, respect to bills and all of that. But you see, this also speaks to a manifestation of the kind of, let me not say presidency, the kind of polity that we have currently, where you have some people who are very powerful in government, you have some people who are less powerful, you have a lot of overlap, you have a lot of, abdication of responsibilities. The issues with government, and I do not want to get into that at this point in time. But for me, the point I'm raising is that it beggars the question for Mr. Lawan to say, oh, some people are misadvising the president. Come on, you have the power of representation, you have the power of oversight, you have the power of lawmaking. So all of these advisors that you have refused refused to name, because he didn't name the advisors,
He did not.
the officials he talked about, that you have refused to name. They are somewhat under, the purview of the National Assembly. The National Assembly could as well also have a way to intervene. That's why I said there is something he's not saying that we probably need to hear him speak on.
Political brinkmanship. At its best, only time will tell. But let's look at the roles now, because it's not the first time we're talking about a difference of opinion between both arms of government. And I think this is a very, very delicate discussion, because some people would tell you in a nutshell, okay, that, it is good when the legislative arm of government and the executive not, on the same page, because then the people benefit. I don't know how that works, because I think any distraction to good governance delivery is a negative for the people. I don't know about being friends or enemies. I don't understand what that is. It's like the press. Ours is simply to hold to account, not to support or, denigrate. It's just to hold to account. Now, this relationship, the executive goes out looking for a job. They are put into office by everyday Nigerians. We give them our votes on the strength. This is how it's meant to work. On the strength of, what they say they will bring to the table that we find favorable. That's what is meant to inform our votes. This person has come and he wants to address certain areas of my life that are important to me. I'm going to give him a chance. So I cast my vote for the person. Now, by casting my vote, I've given him, his marching orders to deliver what he said he would to me. That's the executive. Now, the legislator, on the other hand, has the power of oversight to ensure that your best interests are being served. And because this is a democracy, it's not a monarchy, for example, the public funds need to be closely accounted for, decisions in the best interest of the people. All these things come before the purview of the legislator. And on top of that, the legislator is responsible for making laws that govern our interactions. Now, every year, in the past, I don't want to say this year going forwards, but every year when it comes to the appropriation bill, which is a document which essentially, for the benefit of our listener, the appropriations bill is just basically the executive saying, these are our plans for the coming year. That document is sent to the National Assembly, and there's a lot of bickering and back and forth. In fact, it's got to a certain point in the 8th Assembly when certain items were removed and some introduced by the legislator. That prompted the discussion on who had the power to remove or introduce items into the proposed budget. Now, that is an area where the relationship between the executive and the legislative arms of government is very, very strained when they're doing their back and forth. Shouldn't this process be much easier given the fact that there's a liaison between both of them? And when the executive is planning, do they consider sitting down with the representatives of the people to find out, this is what we want to do to improve the lives of your people in this area? Shouldn't you interface with the people from that area through their representatives and senators to inform your planning of the appropriations bill? Isn't this where the window for lobbying, should be opened? Because I think this is another area we want to address. How is this part, managed by other democracies in the world?
Right. Very good question. Again, let me make the point that separation of powers does not necessarily translate to an antagonistic relationship, because some people mistake the fact that because there is separation of powers, so you must stay on your lane and you must stay on parallel lanes and, continue to be in antagonisms. And that way also does not deliver the objectives of governance. Separation of powers also allows that there is an intertwine, an interface, between both arms of government. And I think that's what you're referring to when you talk about consultations maybe around the budgetary process. Indeed, the budgetary process has come to define the relationship between the executive and the legislature in this country. Certain keywords have added to our lexicon in this country. You talk of, and you hear of budget padding, and you hear of, insertions and all of that. Perhaps it's only in this country that you hear such lexicons, in the political books. But again, what I'm saying is that this is how we have come to define the relationship as far as the budgetary process is concerned. It ought not to be so, because the Constitution, the grant no makes provisions for who does what and what. The appropriation bill is what it is. It is a bill. It is a proposal. It is an estimate of budget, of expenditure, of income for the year. And so nobody gives a bill to Parliament and expects Parliament not to make an input, because the Constitution clearly provides that they have power of the purse. They must appropriate, and in appropriating, they must take into account the interest of their constituents, the overriding interest, of course, of the country, and of course, their individual constituents. So it will be out of place to actually expect that the budget bill that you sent to the National Assembly would come back the same way it is. So the misunderstandings has always been around that area. People should understand that it is not about insertions or what word you want to use. It's about the legislature exercising its powers, to treat a bill that has been forwarded to it by the executive arm of government and return it back. Now, this is where the consultations are important, because if they were there were consultations before the submission of the budget, it reduces the possible friction. It reduces possible areas, of what eventually now becomes full-blown crisis between both arms of government around the budgetary process, because they are able to come to certain understanding to say, look, okay, certain key benchmarks, for instance, the oil price benchmark, the production cap and all of that, they arrive at all of those. Of course, the law, the MTEF, the medium-term expenditure framework, makes provisions, ample provisions to have all of those happen. But then the key items of the budget, where the expenditure, the capital projects, the recurrence, some jojoing usually is advised to happen, so that it is not just a linear process where, okay, I give it to you, you don't see it before I give it to you, I walk it, and I expect that you throw it back at me the way I've given it to you. That's a fallacy. It doesn't work that way in the presidential system of government anywhere else in the world. So the point is that our expectations need to accommodate the fact that the legislature must do its work. It must do its work in making sure that, it performs that power of the purse over what should be allocated to what. The authoritative allocation of value is actually performed to a great extent by the legislature, and you can't take that away. It's provided for in the laws. So once that expectation, is seen in that light, the public would begin to understand that it is not about a misplacement of roles, or it's not about, an overstepping of boundaries. It's about what the law provides for. Now, this is where it also comes down to the roles of the liaisons,
Yes.
between the legislature and the executive. They have that onerous responsibility to midwife that process, respect to the transmission of bills and, even assented bills to both sides of the divide. So if they are not savvy enough and they do not understand the complexities and are not able to navigate the curious and sometimes complex political environment involved, that is where it becomes a matter. It manifests as a crisis. It manifests as friction. It manifests as unfriendliness between both arms of government. So again, it's about how not just those officials, but also how the presidency itself, carries itself with respect to the legislature, and also on the reverse, on the flip side, how the legislature relates or opts to relate or purports to relate with the executive. Mm-hmm. Currently, you see a legislature, as we currently have it in the Ninth Assembly, that is more like beholden to the executive. We have seen cases. It has been spoken. The president of the Senate has spoken more than once that, look, whatever Mr. Buhari brings is right. We will pass it. So again, that's what brings me to the point about how does it not turn around to come to say, look, some people are misadvising the president. I do not understand that.
Given the purported access that
exactly, the purported access and the purported, impression, the impression it creates that, look, we are on one page and we believe in this president. This president is our Baba in quote and all of that. So it should save us all of that, lamentation about some people misadvising. That those are issues that he can deal with within the purview, of his office and, of course, of the National Assembly by extension. So the point is that how both key officials in both arms perceive each other arm of government is also very important. So, because invariably the PLOs or the liaison officers, eventually they are like errands. They just perform the errands that have been, they have been sent on by their bosses and all of that. So it is actually the perception. How does the boss receive? How does he perceive? And how does he choose to relate to the National Assembly? On the flip side, how does the National Assembly choose to relate with the president? Does it choose to be an assertive National Assembly, or it chooses to be one that is okay with being subservient, or it chooses to be one that is okay with being like, okay, look, we will just, because everything becomes politicized as a party matter, we don't want to see that we are seen to be opposing or in opposition to the president, even on issues that are clearly, should be looked at beyond or out of political partisan prisms.
Okay, sorry, let me just ask you this question. Okay, when it comes to budget implementation, whose job is it to ensure that which was suggested as much as possible is delivered? Of course, we can't control acts of God and so on and so forth. That's why a budget is an estimate. But we've had, repetitively now, low budget implementations. Some would say it's on the increase. I've not measured it myself, so I can't say whether it is or not. But who would be responsible for ensuring the budget is implemented at least to a responsibly respectable degree? Let me just use that phrase carefully. Because again, it's an estimate. We can't control everything, but the levels are way, way too low. And another question I want to ask, I'm putting you on the spot with this one. The National Association of Resident Doctors, they've gone on strike not long after they had a discussion with the executive. And part of their demands includes some monies being made available for a backlog of promises that were made, payments that are owed, and so on and so forth. In the past, we've seen strikes, all right, be resolved with monies being paid, but we don't hear about the monies being legislated for. I wonder, what do you make of that? I'm asking the question because we believe our legislators, in their powers of oversight and appropriations, are meant to, give the thumbs up or not regarding public expenditure.
Interestingly, both questions they are intertwined. They may appear to be on different planes, and this is the interface, because the appropriation is a bill when it is in consideration. Once it is passed by the National Assembly and an assent is given by the president, it's no longer a bill. It is now an act of the National Assembly. It is now a law. It is no longer an estimate. It is now a law. You are not allowed to actually vary a single item in the law without what you call a virement, for instance. You must come back to the National Assembly to secure that permission to make a variation in the implementation of the budget. And the implementation of the budget is the sole responsibility of the executive arm of government. Of course, that comprises the ministries, the departments, and the agencies of government. So that point must be made clear. But it is the very important responsibility and duty of the National Assembly to ensure compliance with the law. And that is where the power of oversight comes in. So when they pass the budget, becomes a law, an appropriation act, they do not go to sleep. They continue to monitor the implementation by MDAs and by every other department of the executive arm of government to ensure that there is no violation of that law, because there are consequences for violation provided for in the law. To ensure that, okay, look, are we in line with the principles, the directive principles and objectives of state and all of that, the entire big picture, and then the specific respects to what was specifically legislated for in the budget. So the relationship continues, and it doesn't have to be fractious, I insist. It doesn't have to be rocky. It doesn't have to be less cordial, or it doesn't have to be, unfriendly, so to speak. Now, the question, this is how it relates to the other question about the doctors issue, because, it appears that the demands are centered all around about payments, wages, allowances, public funds, which cannot be spent without an approval by the National Assembly. So the assumption would be that these allowances that are being requested for, that is behind this strike, they would have been provided for in the budget. And if they have not been provided for, the question will be what has been the interface. And again, this is where the issue of consultations come in. Consultations pre-budget presentation, consultations on a continual basis. What has happened? I recall specifically that during the last time that they issued a strike notice, they wanted to go on strike, there was an intervention by the National Assembly, not from plenary. I know that there was an intervention specifically by the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Honorable Femi Gbagbo-Mila, and even from the Senate, the Committee on Health. There were interventions. So somewhat, somehow, they were able to avert that strike action. So it will suggest to us that all of these requests, all of these demands by the doctors would have been taken into account in making and passing the budget for 2021. So, I do not have the details of whether those demands are contained in the budget, but the expectation would be that they have been taken into account in the passing of the budget, in passing and getting the budget to become a law. So the question is, why are we not implementing it? Why do we have to wait for, a strike to be called before, we start running around again? So look, how do we, get these people back to work, frontline workers in the middle of a pandemic? It's quite an embarrassing situation that we have found ourselves, no doubt. But is it avoidable? If it is avoidable, why did we not avoid it? If we did not avoid it, who is responsible? Like I keep making a point in this program, there should be consequences, for default, there should be consequences, for actions or inactions that put us in embarrassing situations. It is because of lack of consequences for actions and inactions, by officials paid by public funds. That is why we continue to have some of these embarrassing situations become like a norm rather than the exception. So this is where I think that we need to also put the legislature on the spot, where these funds budgeted for, these funds for these payments of the hazard allowances, their wages, were they budgeted for? If they were budgeted for, and we know that the budget is currently being implemented, why are they not being paid? Do we have issues with the revenues? So we need some kind of responses to these and other questions that we should be asking. So you see why both issues are kind of related, because it's right down back to the budgetary process and to the executive legislature relationship.
Talking about the budgeting, for example, things like hazard allowances, these are predetermined issues. We know how many doctors are in the system. I think that's a question for the Ministry of Health, the legislators to the Ministry of Health. Did you accommodate for this in your budget? Because this is one year of COVID-19 now. We've been through two budget cycles. We're in the second budget cycle since this thing hit the entire world. There's also the controversy of voting funds for the purchase of vaccines or distribution of vaccines. These are things that we expected to have been on the table because, again, COVID-19 has straddled two budget years. So I think that's questions there for
on the vaccines, I know that they are talking about a supplementary appropriation bill.
Exactly.
Indeed, the Minister of Finance did speak on that issue during the week, where she said that there is a submission from the defense sector that they are waiting so that they can get that bill together and have it sent to the National Assembly. So we know that on the issue of the COVID-19 vaccines and vaccination process, it's all been carried forward to the supplementary appropriation budget that we're expecting to have. Just thought to make this clarification.
And I also want to say thank you so much, because I learn a new thing every time I sit down and I have a talk with you. That's why we're partnering on this platform. For example, I never knew that the appropriations bill, once it's signed, becomes a law, and every single penny must be implemented according to the laid down law, which it is. And any deviation, any change, any additional spending or any change whatsoever to what that document says we should spend on, the presidency, the executive rather, has to go back to the National Assembly. That's the process of violence. Has to go back to the National Assembly and say, okay, the 1 billion we budgeted for buying school books, we need to take some money out of there and build an extra 10 kilometers of railway. They must go back to the National Assembly, because anything they do outside of the thumbs up or the permission from the National Assembly is breaking the law. So that's very important. We spell that out.
Precisely.
Again, for our listener, a budget is an estimate. It says this is what we plan to do. The National Assembly has a look at the document in the best interest of the people. While they're doing that, they could introduce some things which are in the best interest of the people, or take out some things which are in the best interest, not in the best interest of the people. But once the document is given back to the executive and it's signed, the budget now becomes a law, which means you must follow everything to the letter. If the president wants to change one line item, spend one extra naira on something that is not captured in the document, he's got to go back to the National Assembly and say, oi, here we are again. We didn't include X, Y, Z, and we need to take 10 naira from here to put in a thing. He can't do it unilaterally. This is what the law says. The reason we're harping on this is to show the importance of the relationship, again, between both arms of government, and so that we fully understand the role of our National Assembly. Arguably, we will keep reminding you of this. The National Assembly, the legislative arm of government, is your strongest interface with governance. This is where you have a voice through town halls and so on. Now, talking about town halls, I'm looking at town hall meetings. That is consulting with the people in the process of governance. Apart from the public hearings we have, we don't really have much town hall meetings, do we? As much as we should, given the fact that we're a developing country with numerous challenges. The reason I say that is because, I listen to phone calls that come across the line, and for the last few years, there's a disconnect. There is a chasm between people and leadership. I don't know. What can we do to improve our town hall meetings? Is it challenging for the legislators to do? Is it cumbersome for them? Is it technically difficult? Is it impossible? What are the challenges, do you think, in holding town hall meetings for our legislators? Is it accessibility? Or I will ask you this, okay? Are they afraid of sitting in the same room with people who will ask them, my daughter's getting married, my farm burnt down, complaints asking for money? What's the challenge?
To be honest, why I smile? Because you can't dismiss those challenges.
It's
because
inclusive.
They interfere in what should be the ID and legally provided for relationship between citizens and their elected representatives in Parliament. When the spokesperson of the House of Representatives said the other time that there is a lot of pressure from citizens, from constituents, and suggested, that this may be a reason why, we have parliamentarians, sometimes drop dead. We have a couple of deaths in the current National Assembly. Even though that may be an exaggeration, as some people have said, but I think that we cannot completely wave that aside and say, because, and this is why I love that we're having this partnership and this program going, because it affords that platform to educate Nigerians on what is it that this is the role of the Parliament, what are the responsibilities of legislators, and so we understand what to ask for and what not to ask for. Yes, we are a communal society, and we believe that, we can share our burdens and we can receive help. That's fine. But it is not a thing of entitlement that because we elected Mr. Lagbaja into the National Assembly, and so he owes us by all means possible to ensure that our school fees for our children, are paid, and that even when we want to take the luxury of marrying a new wife, he has to come forth and pay the bills. No, it's sad, but that's the reality in certain and different parts of this country where the expectation is misplaced clearly, So that needs to be also a clear objective of this partnership. And I like the way it's already coming forth, the way you break it down, the way you try to emphasize a new learning whenever it comes up in this program. It's amazing, and kudos to you. So the question about being afraid, yes, it may be, but that's not sufficient because the legislature performs three key roles: lawmaking, oversight, and representation. You cannot represent me if you do not speak with me often, if you do not consult with me, if you do not consult with your constituents, with people who say, look, this is what we think we need. This is our agenda for the year. Can you go and push it? If you do not consult and have that mandate clearly from your constituents, you are perhaps on your own in the National Assembly or in the State Assembly. So it brings back to that question of how do you connect with your constituents to receive that mandate, that specific demand for them. If that is not happening, then that disconnect is actually, I would lay it on the fault, on the doorstep of the legislator, because the institution also makes provisions for that. So you have each legislator has a constituency office he is supposed to maintain, indeed budgeted for and paid for by public funds. He has aides who are budgeted for and paid for by public funds. Some of these aides are supposed to be deployed to constituency offices. So a representative in Abuja from Niger, for instance, from Katsina, from Delta, from wherever, are all supposed to have constituency offices. The question is, are those offices functional? Are they staffed? Are the aides of the legislators available to speak or interface or even run errands on behalf of the legislator and on behalf of the people both ways? Are these things happening? If these things are not happening, whether through direct town halls, you call everyone to sit, or you even do virtual, or you even say, look, occasionally I make phone calls and I have vest feedback. If none of this is happening in the minimum, then there is a failure clearly on the part of the legislature.
There's no representation.
There is no representation. That is it clearly defeats the function of representation, which is one of the tripods on which the parliament, the National Assembly or the State Assembly stands.
All right. I'm still here in the studio with Mr. Oke Epia. He's the publisher of Order Paper. We're talking about the relationship between the legislative and the executive arms of government. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our education on how the legislative arm of government works. I will open up the phone lines for your questions as well as we try to school you in legislative processes. All of this when we return. Stay with us. Abuja.
When you need somebody near you who will take the time to hear you, you can talk to us.
Hi there. At We FM 106.3, we do know that every business out there can do better with some support. Talk with us today and let's talk about how we can help you position your business to stand out. Call us on 0803-365-9584. That is 0803-365-9584. Or visit our website on www.wefmng.com. We are here to help make your business stand out.
We FM Abuja.
Thanks for staying with We FM 106.3. It's now 16 minutes to 4 o'clock. If you're just joining us, you're welcome. You're listening to Legislative Hour. My name is Camry, and I'm still here in the studio with the publisher of Order Paper, Mr. Oke Epia. We've been talking about the relationship between the legislative and the executive arms of government. I will open up the phone lines now to take your questions, hear your observations and thoughts. You can call it up on 0817 687 2132. Again, 0817 687 2132. You can also call 0817 687 2134. Don't forget, you can always send us a WhatsApp message to 0905 353 5305. Right, let's take the first call. Good afternoon and welcome to the program.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us. Who am I speaking with, please?
My name is Austin Ifedi.
Austin, thank you for joining us. Please go right ahead.
Okay, I just came into the program halfway, but I'm quite interested in what you guys are talking about. It's quite enlightening, and I think the issue here is people keeping to the protocol of how things are supposed to be done in this country. That is a major issue we have. Part of the problems are, the cost of running for election. So when people spend so much money running this election, they feel is a winner take all game, notwithstanding the part the masses play in getting them into that position. We really expect so much from our legislators But with what is going on in the government now, it's not balanced. The executive seem to do what they want with total not giving attention to the National Assembly or what the protocol says, what they should do. So I feel we need to look inward by, when we have opportunity to elect ministers, we need to do proper screening, not money thing. The masses should reduce the idea of getting money from these politicians and elect people you can hold accountable. That's my take.
Thank you, Austin. Interesting observation there. Well, in continuation of our education, you can still keep the calls going. I'll keep the lines open, but in continuation of our education, we will again focus on this week's Monday meme, today being Friday. But let's take the next call before that. Good afternoon and welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, Mr. Camry.
Frank Eze, thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon to the guest. You are already preparing me for legislative studies. My notes are filled up here from what I have learned from you.
Excellent.
In fact, I'm still equipped. God bless you. I only want to comment on what the Senate President said, the lamentation or the statement of the Senate President.
Yes.
When he said there seems to be an interference in whatever. But I think I can defend the executive here. Nobody is interfering. What is happening is, I may call, unnecessary submission. You can't have a footmat in your house, and your footmat will now come back and say, don't clean your legs on me, or don't keep me where I am kept.
I love these parables, Frank.
When
Go on.
The Senate President considers that whatever Mr. Buhari brings is good to go. I mean, they have already submitted themselves as a mere department of the executive instead of an arm of government. So nobody is interfering. It's just unnecessary submission, and it is quite unfortunate. Please ask our guests, please, what will be the implication of a country like Nigeria maintaining one chamber of the National Assembly? Say, for instance, the House of Reps that have quite good number of representatives here.
Okay, that's a good question. Thank you, Frank Eze. Okay, I think you should take up that one. He's talking about unicameral legislature. What's the impact of that on the country?
Very good question. I'd like to commend Mr. Eze for that metaphor of the footmat. I mean, it's brilliant. I would take that away with me from the studio. It's clearly indicates what is going on between both arms of government, and Mr. Lawan should let us be and not bother us with those lamentations. Now, Nigeria is a diverse country with a huge population, and the makers or framers of the Constitution, went for a bicameral legislature in order to account for the diversity in terms of representation. So you have two arms of government, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate has an equal number of representation across all states, 36 states, and of course the Federal Capital Territory, which has a lone senator. Right? But, so you have a House of Representatives that takes account, of the diversity in terms of population, landmass, and what else? These key indices in deciding representation. And that is why you have in the House of Representatives a state like Lagos, and I think Kano has 24 or thereabout members of the House of Representatives from that state. And a state like Bayelsa, I think, has 6 or thereabout. And of course, in terms of size, Kandu, Lagos, Bayelsa, you can see the difference.
Oh, yeah.
So population-wise as well, you would see that it would not be actually fair or wise to have just 3 persons represent a Bayelsa state and 3 persons represent a Senate. It may not thoroughly account for the diversity of our nation.
Democracy is about majority. Numbers are important.
Thank you very much, Cameron.
Yes.
So that's the reason why we have a bicameral legislature. Of course, the issues of cost of governance and all of that has thrown up the conversation. Can we sustain it? Can we not? Let
me ask you to hold that thought. Let's just grab one more call. Oh dear, sorry about that. Okay, so
Yes, so it's the concern about whether we should continue with a bicameral legislature is valid. It's valid because we have issues around cost of governance, dwindling resources. And,
okay, let me ask you again. Sorry about this. Good afternoon and welcome to the program.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us. Who am I speaking with?
My name is Joe Chaiba. I'm coming from Kaduna State.
Your name is who?
Joe Chaiba.
Okay, Mr. Ayuba, please go ahead. Oh dear, sorry about that. Unfortunately, we can't take any more calls because we are pressed for time. But Mr. Oke Epia here was just talking about the reason why we have a bicameral legislature. There are valid reasons, he says, given expenses, the cost of governance. But there's also another, reason that has to do with the size, the numbers of people in various states. Lagos State, small land mass, huge population. If democracy is based on numbers, then how do you account for that? But to equalize the playing field somewhat, you have a Senate which has a set amount of senators per state, irregardless of the number of people. So at the Senate, everybody's equal. In the House of Representatives, people with higher numbers will have the advantage because that's democracy. It's about numbers. The majority will carry the day. The minority will have their say. So I think that's how it works. Right, so to continue education on this week's Monday meme, I've gone straight to Order Paper's Twitter handle and I've dug up this, bit of education for you. So, Frank, is it? I hope you still got ink in your pen and more leaves to your notepad. Here he goes. Now, in light of the recent misconception on the petition that was signed by the TIV Nigeria in Diaspora and rejected by the Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives, that's Honorable Ahmed Wase, this Monday meme is focused on dissecting legislative petitions at the National Assembly. Now, as you may already know, the legislature performs three key basic functions that Mr. Epia has just explained now: lawmaking, representation, and oversight. Public petition is one of the windows of performing the representation functions, wherein constituents are supposed to directly feel the impact of their representatives. A petition, what is it? Well, it's a request to the Senate or the House of Representatives regarding a cause seeking to enforce a right or obtain mercy or other benefits. The National Assembly has processes in place to treat petitions from aggrieved, shortchanged or concerned Nigerians wherever they may reside. Now, the Nigerian Senate and the House of Representatives each have standing committees on ethics, privileges, and public petitions constituted to address petitions from citizens. The committee is generally guided by the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the standing orders of the Senate and the House, and the principles of fairness, justice, and equity. A member of the public who is aggrieved and wants the National Assembly to intervene must submit their petition through the legislator representing them. The legislator then presents the petition on the floor of the Senate or the House of Representatives and is subsequently referred to the Committee on Public Petition without any debate. However, the House of Representatives and the Senate at the National Assembly doesn't intervene in a matter which is already in court. Once referred, the Committee on Public Petitions will invite relevant parties and receive their oral testimonies and written submissions. Now, based on these testimonies and submissions, the committee will make its observations, deliberate on the matter, and arrive at its findings. Their recommendations are presented at plenary and passed as a resolution of the Senate or the House. The resolutions are expected to resolve the matter amicably, but in a case where the concerned parties are dissatisfied, they are at liberty to approach the judiciary. And that's your tip for this week, your meme for the week from Order Paper. Right, closing remarks from the very, very much learned Oke Epia here in the studio. Okay, we just have a minute.
You see, that performance of the petitions, the representation, again, speaks to the issue of the interconnect between both arms of government. So that appears to be a quasi-judicial function. being played by the parliaments. So you see, there is separation of powers, but there is also checks and balances. It's a beautiful democratic practice, and we should be patient to learn them and continue to engage with them as citizens so that we can see how well they work and try to change them if we don't have them serve our purpose right.
All right, thank you so much to Oke Epia. He is the publisher of Order Paper. Order Paper covers the National Assembly quite well, I might add. Thank you once again.
My pleasure, Camry. Thank you.
Right, that'll do it for Legislative Hour this week. You can catch us again next Friday. Remember, the program starts at 3 p.m. You don't want to miss it. And if you've got questions, don't forget you can always contact us. All right, you can tweet us at WeFMNG. You could connect us on Facebook. Write your questions down. If you've got questions for your legislators, pass them forward. We'll get across to the legislators and present the questions. As we go along in the series, our plan is to have the legislators come here so we can do an interactive session with you. But before we do that, we need to improve your understanding and knowledge of just how that arm of government works. So once again, that's it for the program. Please stick around. Coming up next will be news at the top of the hour, and that'll be followed by the Sundowner with Chairman Dabeng. Right after Chairman comes Udeme George and the gang on the Udeme George Sports Show. Right after that, Phoebe Ashamade will sit down with the guests to take you through life stories, which is a journey of inspiration. That's what we like to call it. Until then, happy Easter one and all. My name is Camry, and I'm proud to call myself a Nigerian.
The time is 4 o'clock.
Abuja, you know you